Auschwitz. I'm the director of CHI, and I got to tell you, today hasn't exactly been my typical Thursday, or really my typical Wednesday-Thursday combination, because, and this is one of the really nice perks of the job, we should do this more often, I don't usually get to engage with political and moral leaders of their country, and yesterday and today has been quite amazing in that respect. And so I hope that you'll equally come to appreciate and that maybe admire our distinguished speaker's wisdom. This event, and this is also a little bit different, is one that certainly would not have been possible without the support and assistance of many units and leaders across the campus and the university. And so I'd like to thank the Multicultural Center, the Global Leadership Center, African Studies, the Center for Law, Justice, and Culture, Global Studies, War and Peace, the Departments of History, Political Science, and African American Studies, and the Center for International Studies. And we really have a sort of a tremendously diverse, global engagement-oriented community there that we can bring together around these events. So I would now typically introduce the speaker, but today that honor should go to Professor Grimay Negash, the Director of African Studies.
Hello, thank you, Egon, for the honor. I would like to welcome our distinguished speaker, the Honorable Halifa Sallah. He is a member of parliament and a special advisor to the Gambian president. My name is Grimay Negash. I am, as he said, the Director of African Studies. I am also a professor of African literature in the Department of English. I am really very delighted to have this honor. This is a lecture hosted by the Contemporary History Institute, and we have had collaborations before with the Department of History and African Studies, Center of International Studies generally, and I hope this will continue. I would like to express really my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Asansar and to you as well, Egon, and the chair of the Department of History, Catherine Jellison. I will say a few words by way of introducing, preparing the ground for Halifa Sallah. But before that, there is a little story I need to tell you, and it's a true story. It's really a true story, and it's related to this event. The historian, I mean the people who read in Ohio University history and the African community, of course, know about this. But in 2016, this is for those who may not have followed the situation, the former ruler, Yahya Jammeh of the Gambia, was kind of departing. He was being kind of deposed, driven away by popular opposition, democratic movement in the Gambia. And I was kind of following the developments unfolding. I saw at some point, I think maybe it was a combination of the BBC or the social media, I saw somebody, gray-haired, really distinguished looking person, but very passionate speaking to his people and giving interviews to journalists. I guess the next day or something I asked Asansar, I saw somebody like that. Who is that? He said that is Halifa Sallah. You were his hero while growing up. So we said kind of, all right, we need to get this person. We need an African perspective because if you want to study, always they say in transitions, these in-between spaces are critical. So the African situation in the Gambia is kind of represents other political contexts in current days, in the present day. And there are lessons to be drawn from the Gambian experience, how societies, African societies, the kind of challenge African societies face when transitioning from undemocratic system to peaceful, in a peaceful and democratic way. So that was the story, and this is a reality today. How do you introduce Halifa Sallah? I will give you just kind of some impressions also in the interest of time. He first appeared in the public domain in the Gambia in 1978 as a social activist advocating for social justice and championing the cause of the poor and destitute both in urban and rural areas. Already as a young man, at the age of 16, he was inspired to have a mission of service to the African continent after attending a symposium on the state of African nations and the African diaspora during the turbulent years of decolonization in the 1960s, when profound changes were happening in the continent. So at the age of 17, he came to the United States. He came to the United States to study. He went to a boarding school in Georgia. In 1972, he moved from Georgia to Missouri, and he was enrolled at the School of Ozarks in Point Lookout, that is in Missouri, and he did his bachelor's degree in sociology and with a minor in psychology. From Missouri, he moved to Washington, D.C., to Howard University to pursue a combined program of MA and PhD. And at that particular moment, and when he was in Washington, D.C., together with other African students, they created an association called the African Youth Movement for Liberation and Unity. That is the AYMLU for short. I'm mentioning this because he had a local branch in the Gambia of this movement as well. In the Gambia, he continued his work with this organization, and slowly, in 1978, he joined the social welfare department, and he was responsible for the research training and family welfare in order to be among the most deprived in the community. He continued also his civic education and awareness gradually. I think the government kind of noticed what he was doing with the organization and his activism, and he was jailed in 1983 under the pretext of being involved directly or indirectly in a coup d'etat. The charges were dropped later because the government could not substantiate their claims. Following his release, he resigned from the civil service and started writing, raising awareness. He has produced numerous papers about the Gambia and generally about the African continent. And currently he is working on a book under the title The Impasse and Its Aftermath. Maybe this afternoon we're talking about Ohio University Press. Maybe that is something for us as well. He became a member of parliament for Serrekunda Central in 2002. He was a founding member of the Pan-African Parliament and also was the coordinator of the National Alliance for Democracy and Development, which brought the opposition together in 2005. And more importantly, in 2016, that is at the time when Yahya Jammeh was departing, he led the coalition of the opposition and brought them together. I need to mention he was also a presidential candidate in 2006. His role during the transition period, I will talk about it I hope later, was critical in the sense that he was the one who persuaded through negotiation and skill and vision the different forces in the Gambia to come together and create a coalition which is called Coalition 2016. After the new government was elected, he was asked to be appointed as a minister in the cabinet. He declined it, he refused it, but he expressed to the president that he preferred to work as an informal advisor, but there was a condition, and the condition was without payment. So he's not paid for it, but he is the special advisor to the president. He stood as a candidate in April 2017, and then he was elected again in the National Assembly. In the National Assembly, he is currently the chairperson of the Public Enterprise Committee and vice chairperson of the Committee on Defense and Security. In this Contemporary History Institute lecture, today he will speak under the title Developments in the Gambia since the disputed 2016 election. After his lecture, he will be happy to answer some of your questions. Please welcome the Honorable Halifa Sallah to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing me here at a time when the whole world is in transition. In interacting with the staff of this university, I recalled an experience I had in Sweden, where I requested my host to take me to an early childhood training center with the fundamental objective of trying to understand the mind of the children. Because in our own political program, we started by opening a nursery school where we wanted to show the community what could be done with the child, how you can build the intelligence of the child, nurture the character of the child, inject values in that child. And it became a showcase in our own country. And in talking to those children, I asked them the simple question: what did you have for breakfast? They mentioned many things until they mentioned chocolate. I asked them the question: where does chocolate come from? They said, the shop. That was the limit of their horizon. And we started to look and search and inquire to discover the source of chocolate. And ultimately we discovered that it came from farther afield, in villages and farms, cultivated by poor farmers. And from this tree and fruit, the child could have his or her chocolate. And I asked them, if those farmers perish, will you have your chocolate? Of course not. So it shows how close we are and how we depend on each other for survival. But because of ignorance, the mind becomes myopic, self-centered, and the horizon diminishes, and we look at ourselves alone and not the other. So my purpose for being here is to build a bridge that we started building in a country that we now call the Gambia, which had not always existed. It came into being as a result of an agreement on the 10th of August 1889 between the British and the French Republic, the British Crown and the French Republic, that they needed to share a territory in that area, and then they carved the Gambia, and outside of that territory the French called Senegal, and consequently you had externally drawn boundary defining the external territorial integrity of a colony, which by 1902 became real after the internal resistance was defeated, and that piece of land became a British colony. Through struggles for self-determination and independence, it gained its independence in 1965. And in 1970, it moves to a higher stage of being a republic. Through our own search to understand what we need to do to solve the problem of our own countries, we studied our own history and discovered that indeed, in 1970, 24th April, when the Gambia became a republic, something should have happened to the people. The people also should have evolved from being subjects of a colonial power to become sovereign citizens of a republic. We discovered that the fundamental shortcoming throughout the world was the failure to discover that countries cannot become liberated unless their people became liberated. That the real battle for the liberation of countries is to liberate the minds of the people so that they become sovereign. So consequently, we made it a political project to start to educate the Gambian people so that they would know that on the 24th of April 1970, a new Gambian should have been born. A Gambian that was the depository of the sovereignty of the Republic. A Gambian who was endowed with fundamental rights. The rights to freedom of expression, to freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of religious belief or philosophical belief, freedom of movement, freedom to join political associations, to join unions, freedom to combine, to ensure that our collective intelligence would guide our collective destiny. This is when we began to discover that our people were not truly free. We established a newspaper, and the map of this country was put in chains. And the people questioned us. We became independent in 1965. We said, no, you attained the right to self-determination and independence in 1965, but you were still a constitutional monarchy. They did not teach you your constitution, because in that constitution, still you had a governor general who owed allegiance to the British crown, and that governor general was the executive. And you had a prime minister, you had a referendum, but your political parties did not educate you to know that the purpose of the referendum was to ask you whether you wanted to become a sovereign person, to become a republic. But because they were fighting over power, the referendum failed. Nobody educated you. So consequently, you continue to see yourself as members of an ethno-linguistic group, as member of a religion, as a member of a region. Sectarian politics became dominant. Patronage became the nexus between those who call themselves representative and the people. We told them that it was on the 24th of April 1970 that you became a republic after a referendum. But nobody explained to you that you were a lawmaker. That was the purpose of a referendum. that constitutions were nothing but architectural sketches of how the foundation of a nation should be laid. It was not meant just for intelligent minds that you call lawyers. It was meant for you to know how you were to be governed, to know that you needed to have an executive, and that executive will derive his or her authority from your consent. And that executive should exercise that power entrusted to him or her for no other purpose but to promote your general welfare. And no executive was fit to occupy that position unless that executive did precisely that, promote your general welfare within a period of 5 years. Otherwise, you should put that representative out and elect such other person who will be able to carry out that service, that mandate. That executive was only a public trustee. That you own the country, you should live in liberty. Nobody should exercise power with impunity, to arrest you without cause, detain you without cause, torture you with, for no other reason but to simply oppress you. You were supposed to be an embodiment of dignity and self-worth. And that is why you should elect lawmakers who will make laws to protect your general welfare. We indicated to them the failure to educate you, to empower you, is why you are yet to be free. That is why you live in poverty. Because we have an ocean with all the seafood that needs to give you the quality diet that you need to live on this earth. That all over, we have the land. Tropical climate, fruits of all sorts, mangoes and guavas, oranges, anything you can think of. Every season and its fruits and vegetables. Then why are you hungry? Why are you poor? Why are your children leaving their land to go to other land in search of better lives? What is the problem? Why did we become independent? So we started to educate the people to understand that unless they take charge of their destiny, they will continue to become victims of blind destiny. That only awareness could lead to their liberation. The first government stayed for 30 years. Based on the ignorance of the people. There was no balanced and proportionate development of society. So the countryside remained in the Stone Age. People living in huts had no opportunity to go to school, to be able to earn an income that will give them quality lives. So we continued to live as the wretched of the earth when we claimed that we had taken charge of our own destiny. That was the irony. In terms of budgets, deficits continued. In terms of trade, deficit continued. Internal and external imbalances in the economy, leading to continuous poverty. There was no linkage between agricultural production and processing, and jobs could not be created. So the policies that should lead to the development of the country had not been utilized to facilitate the development. So consequently, a coup d'etat occurred on the 22nd of July 1994. The military took over. And we were invited to become ministers in that government. We emphasize that the republic does not need a monarch. The republic needs a sovereign citizen. So to take over power and establish an oligarchy and then expect those who are educating the people to become sovereign to join you is simply to ask us to commit political suicide. So we rejected the invitation and demanded that they should call a national conference so that the people will sit down and start to chart a new destiny for the country. They rejected that and established their Armed Forces Ruling Council, Provisional Ruling Council, which was executive and legislative at the same time, suspended constitutions, suspended political parties, put constitutions to be under the supremacy of decrees, consequently tied the arm of the judiciary and ruled by might. Of course, we continue to demand that the republic should be restored and the sovereignty of the people should be restored. Ultimately, they established a transitional program with a national consultative committee, and this was placated to give the impression that civil society has been empowered to do the consultation, whilst the political parties were banned. So representatives from the trade unions, from the teachers' union, medical and dental associations were all mobilized to constitute the committee that did the consultation, and the people, they said, recommended for a 2-year transition program from 1994 to 1996. That program entailed the preparation of a draft constitution, electoral reform, and elections in 1996 and 1997. The country went through that transition. And in 1996, those who carried out the coup d'etat, the coupists, established their own political party. They utilized the same logic of patronage in order to consolidate their political power in the country. The parties of the First Republic were banned from registration as long as they participated in government. Hence, new political parties emerged, some patronized by the parties of the First Republic that could not register, and consequently a new cycle of ensuring that the people cosmetically had power, but in reality were injected with the type of ignorance that made them believe that power could never be changed through the ballot box. So those who took power through the barrel of the gun injected in the people that they were the only people who made change possible after 30 years. Therefore, the country really belonged to them. It was their prize, their vote. And they maintained that ignorance in the country. We continued the political project of educating the sovereign people to understand that power belongs to them. But there were other political parties who simply were interested in political power and who could use patronage or any means, whether intimidation or inducement, just to get to power. So it becomes very clear that even political parties can be enemies to democracy. Because those who keep the people ignorant are clearly enemies of democracy. Because democracy requires the sovereign person with a sovereign mind, capable of discerning what is in the national interest and what is not in the national interest, and having the willpower to be able to make a decision independent of inducement or intimidation. And unless the sovereign person evolves to have that capacity to make an informed choice, democracy would only be a formality, but not a reality. So consequently, the country continued with the battle for control of power. And today, I am called upon to tell you a story. And I will tell you a story where those who carried out a coup d'etat in 1994 continued to preside over the affairs of the country for 22 years. But on the 1st of December, 2016, we went to the polls. And on the 2nd of December, a regime that had been in office for 22 years was defeated in a free and fair election. However, from the 18th to the 21st of January 2017, the Gambian people went through an experience that the whole world followed. So I would say that those 4 days would go down in Gambian history as one of the most, if not the most uncertain, unpredictable, and trying of times. A time bomb was ticking by the hours, minutes, and seconds. No one was sure whether and when it would explode like a thunderbolt from the blue. 50,000 persons had already left the country, and 120,000 others had already become internally displaced persons. Many had their bundles tied, waiting for the breaking news to find their way to safer hideouts. Time and circumstances were awaited with anxiety to dictate their exit. Ground troops with sophisticated and heavy weaponry encircled the country, controlling the main entry and exit point between Senegal and the Gambia. But the porous borders could not entirely be sealed. Fighter jets were in the ready for the takeoff to rule the sky, and naval vessels ruled the waves. The countdown started. The country was hanging on the balance of probability. What was the problematic that gave rise to the impasse? How did events unfold to bring it about? How was it handled to ensure a peaceful transfer of executive power? What are the challenges of democracy, peace, and nation building? What is the way forward? The paper that I'm invited to present had to examine the problematic of the impasse. And my position is clear. There is a correlation between self-perpetuating rule and the propagation of violence and instability on the African continent. Wherever there is self-perpetuating rule, there must be resistance. It is, however, very important for people to also understand the threats and the risks. That resistance, in many instances, must also come with challenges. Because if the resistance is based on ethno-linguistic, religious, regional, sectarian, and other sectionalist purpose or challenges, you'll have a contest of the legitimacy of power. And the end result is to transform young people into cannon foders, fighting under the command of warlords. As a result, many of them will be maimed and killed. And ultimately, they just simply become subjects of new self-perpetuating rulers rather than becoming people who are liberated to be embodied with dignity and self-worth. And that is what happened in Libya. That is what happened in Sudan. And that is what's happening in many parts of the world today. Such changes do lead to shutdown of development activity and the erosion of due process of law, the proliferation of number of refugees, internally displaced persons, poverty, hunger, deprivation, and insecurity. In the Gambia, the people participated in a process which led to peaceful transfer of executive power, despite a tedious and life-threatening impasse. This raises the question of goals, strategy, and tactics in the struggle against self-perpetuating rule. Without the requisites or appropriate goals, strategies, and tactics, self-perpetuating rule cannot be defeated and self-perpetuating rulers uprooted in peace. Hence, the Gambia has a lesson to teach the world. What made it possible to have a peaceful regime change in the Gambia? What role did the different stakeholders in the society play in bringing it about? What lessons does the Gambia have to offer to the continent in particular and the world at large? We, in our struggle in the Gambia, discovered very clearly that 4 months before the December 2016 presidential election, the country was heading towards civil war. And the opposition was not fully prepared for change. 99% of the people in the Gambia never believed that change could come through the ballot box on the 1st of December 2016. No foreign power predicted the possibility of change. No intelligence institution predicted the possibility of change in 2016. How did the change come about? It was a process. After our 1996 election and the coup's consolidated power, 5 years of consolidation of power led to the disempowerment of the people. And therefore, in the 2001 presidential elections, they expanded their consolidation. So it was clear from the opposition parties that we did not have a level ground for multi-party contest. So democracy was not in existence because the people were not free to decide. And since the people were not free to decide, we did not have a democracy. So to those who were thinking strategically, the country needed something more than multi-party contest. What it needed was liberation through peaceful means. And that could only come into being by being conscious that there are two powers in a sovereign republic, even if you have oligarchs ruling it. There is the power of the state, which is in the hands of those who become self-perpetuating rulers. But there is also the power of the people. The power of the people is weakened by ignorance and is also weakened by disorganization. So it is therefore essential to understand that if change is going to be achieved peacefully, it is important to raise the awareness of the people. It is also important to organize the people. When people are organized and aware, no power on earth can subjugate them. So after 2001, that was constantly rung in the ears of the people, that we are weak because we are disorganized, that what we needed to do was to reclaim the sovereignty of the people. Hence, all forces should work together, irrespective of party affiliation, to come up with one presidential candidate who would be utilized as an instrument to galvanize the people as a whole so that they can effect change and uproot self-perpetuating rule. And thereafter, not to have any party or person in office, but to ensure that the people take charge of their destiny by ensuring that the person who comes into office will have no other duty but to build a new country, a new constitution, new institutions, new normative practices for the people to know that power belongs to them. That agenda started in 2003. Agreement was reached in 2005 by all the opposition parties that will create an umbrella organization called the National Association for Democracy and Development, and that all the parties will be free to contest on a non-partisan primary, so that whoever is selected will stand on the ticket of the umbrella party, and when elected would serve only for 5 years, purely to come up with a genuine Republican constitution, utilize the media to educate the people so that they become sovereign, and build the institutions that will ensure accountability and transparency in handling the affairs of the country. That after the 5 years, that person will not stand in next following election and will not support any political party, but will preside over a free and fair contest of political parties. That project continued. 6 by-elections were held under that project. The opposition won 4 and was ahead in the popular vote. But because of division, we could not continue with that project. It failed in 2006. But the failure was a lesson again, that those who were democratic in thinking and had no other agenda but to make our people sovereign continued to propagate that agenda. A united front was created on the same project in 2011 presidential elections, so that a candidate will be selected through a primary, and that person will stand as an independent candidate and to serve a period of 1 term with the same agenda as has been mentioned. Unity could not be ensured, and that project failed. 4 months before the 2016 presidential election, the leader of a major political party in the country was in jail. 3-year conviction. Detention without trial was abundant. Torture, oppression of all sorts. And there was a sense of dejection and hopelessness. And the ethno-linguistic groups were insulting each other. Matches were bought, knives bought. Different types of means of recognizing each other on the basic of ethno-linguistic lines were initiated. And the country was really preparing for civil war. The reaction of some people was to call for an uprising. But in a country where you give a bag of rice to a person to vote for you, you don't expect that person to go in the street to rise up against a government. So the only way those people could express their frustration is to burn things, destroy things, and the first clarion call that the nation was heading towards a type of confrontation where those who control state power will continue to utilize it to brutalize the people, became evident when the campaign headquarters, the party headquarters of the ruling party was burnt. So it was clear that in most instances that blood will be spilled until the military could no longer just look at the blood, then they carry out a coup d'etat. So those were the options: national disintegration or coup d'etat. It was at this point that the project had to be injected again in the political mainstream, but this time in a different way. This time we injected a new direction to the whole project. And that is the lesson that I would want to make clear here. That coalition building requires 4 elements. First and foremost, it requires a driving force. Second, it requires a goal. Third, it requires a strategy. And fourth, it requires tactics. Without those four elements, you cannot have any coalition. The driving force must be what can bring all those who want change together, irrespective of their ethno-linguistic differences, religious differences, regional orientation, sectionally sectarian orientation. They must have something that will push them together and inspire them to move forward. And in the Gambia, the driving force was to tell the people that what existed was not sustainable. But what we need is to build a new Gambia that was inclusive. A Gambia that will guarantee liberty to all. A Gambia that will not be owned by any single political party or any single ethnic group. But a Gambia that will be transformed into a community of sovereign citizens who will be equal in sovereignty and derive benefits equally from their sovereign land, irrespective of their ethno-linguistic, religious, sectarian, regional belongings. We therefore coined the clarion call of building one Gambia, one nation, one people. One Gambia, one nation, one people. And to ensure that that was possible, that we were beginning a new project that will give a start to a nation, we ensured that we also develop the goal of effecting change in 2016 that will not be owned by any political party or group, but it will be owned by the people in common. We therefore decided to develop a strategy of building a coalition. This is how we called all the presidential candidates to come together, 6 of them, to decide on holding a convention where only one person will be selected to be a presidential candidate. And once that person is selected, that person will stand as an independent presidential candidate who would serve for 3 years and will not stand in next following election, so that we put an end to self-perpetuating rule. We wanted that person to be a symbol of self-abnegation, a symbol of service, a symbol of helping us to liberate the country. When we started the discussion, some were not really interested. But they had interest in becoming president. And to become president, you must go to the people. And the people knew that no single party could remove the incumbent. And they themselves were calling for unity. So therefore, if you are a symbol of division, then you are going to lose the support of the people. And that is why every presidential candidate who went on tour to test his or her support base discovered that the people wanted you to go back to the negotiation table. So the coalition in the Gambia was people-driven. It was demand-driven. People wanted it because they were tired of self-perpetuating rule. They were tired of impunity. So consequently, the agenda was, the strategy was, even if 2 people were left, the coalition will continue. On the 17th of October, 2016, we managed to get all the political parties who agreed with the agenda to come to discuss and sign an agreement, and their presidential candidates to also sign the agreement, so that we will hold a convention on the 30th of October. And the person who will be selected will be the presidential candidate of the coalition. That agreement materialized. We held a convention, and the current president was elected as the candidate for the coalition. He resigned from his political party and stood as an independent candidate. This was less than 2 weeks. Elections held on the 1st of December. Less than 2 months, a month and few days, and we won an election. That is the lesson. Despite this short period, an entrenched self-perpetuating ruler, 22 years, could be removed from office because of awareness and organization. When that happened, we had counting on the spot. Since we had counting on the spot, we knew the results. He was overconfident that the opposition was weak and agreed to counting on the spot. But because of organization, the opposition became mighty. Because of awareness, the opposition became mighty and took over power. So I agreed to commend the victor, but ultimately, by the 9th of December, he reneged his position, declared the elections to be null and void, and promised to hold another elections. The reaction was for people to rise up. But again, strategy and tactics. In the camp of the coalition, we understood that if you want to ensure that you are a legitimate power, you must stand by the Constitution. We realized that the battle was a battle of legitimacy. And if we stood up and start the fight, then of course at the end of the day, the leaders of the coalition will have to go underground. And at a given stage, nobody will hear you. And of course, that will be the end. So the strategy was to remain there as a victor and not to be seen to be underground. So therefore, the coalition asserted that there are 2 legitimacies in a sovereign republic: the legitimacy of the verdict of the people and the legitimacy of the Constitution. We therefore told the people that the verdict of the people is inviolable, the Constitution is also inviolable. That they should not go in the street but should understand what the Constitution says. The Constitution said that the term of office of the incumbent is 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, the victor should assume office. So we calculated when that would be, and it was on the 18th of January 2017 for the end of the term of the incumbent, and on the 19th, the victor should assume office. So we simply told the people, go and wait for your own celebration on the 19th of January 2017. Those who are victorious should not go in the street to defy anyone, because you are already waiting to assume office. That is how the population was calm to prepare for the 19th. But the incumbent became destabilized, expecting that the people were going to rise up. Soldiers were deployed in the streets with sandbags everywhere. The coalition spokesperson told the people that they should fraternize with the soldiers, because they too were waiting for a day in order to change their loyalty. That is really what democracy is all about. That since the Constitution says that elections should be held within 3 months before the end of the term of the incumbent, yes, election was held before the end of the term of the incumbent. So he still has a residue of term left. That should be respected. That is his legitimate authority. He can deploy his troops, but fraternize with the troops. And let them be told that on the 19th, the person who is there would definitely no longer be legitimate and will be a rebel if he continued to remain in power. And any soldier who supported him would also be rebels. So therefore, it was necessary to wait for the 19th. ECOWAS came in and found the coalition already decided that the power that be could be there up to the 18th of January. And after that, that power could no longer stay as legitimate power in the Gambia. They also accepted that verdict and therefore went back to establish a standby force in support of the incoming president. When that happened, negotiations started. We continued to educate the citizenry to understand that power belongs to them and that they should wait for the 19th for the president to assume power. And in the public space, in the media, that was constantly emphasized. So as a result, from the 18th to the 19th, the whole country was expecting war because the incumbent refused to go. First, by calling a state of emergency on the 17th of January, 2 days before the end of his term, a day before the end of his term, and 2 days before the assumption of the incoming president. But we insisted that the state of emergency could lengthen his stay in power if election had not already taken place, where a person who was an incoming president was waiting to assume office. There was a class of legitimacy. Yes, the Constitution said that you can have a state of emergency which extends the power of the presidency. But the same Constitution says that at the end of the term of that incumbent, another person who has been elected to office should assume office. So that is why President Barrow was sworn in Dhaka at the Gambian embassy, to give it legitimacy that is a country, an embassy is the home of a president and a citizen It is Gambian territory outside of Gambia. And after that, we started the process of talking to the army, talking to the police, who over time had already accepted that they should owe allegiance to the incoming government at the appropriate time. They were contacted by the spokesperson after the president was sworn in, and they agreed that they will be loyal to civil authority, and that ECOWAS, the AU, as well as the United Nations, had started negotiating with the outgoing president, the ousted president, so that he would leave power. During that period, the ECOWAS troops were at the outskirts, but the Gambian people had already voted for peaceful transfer of power, because those on the side of the government did not go in the street. Those on the side of the coalition did not also go in the street. Everybody was at home. Gambia was as quiet as a desert. Nothing was moving. So the president in the State House was ruling a country of shadows. And as a result, he eventually realized that a person abandoned by ambassadors, abandoned by ministers, abandoned by security personnel, is a person who could no longer stay in power, a person who could no longer fight for power. So therefore, he either had to commit suicide or live, and he chose to live. When he left, there was a vacuum. The incoming president was in Dhaka. Outgoing president had left the country. And the economic forces had not entered Gambia, contrary to many views that the economic forces were in the country. They had not entered Gambia when the ex-president was leaving. So at the airport, the Gambian forces were the only forces there. But those forces had changed loyalty. And therefore, the spokesperson of the coalition had to contact them because of the vacuum in power. And they accepted to protect government property, the lives and properties of the citizenry. There was no looting in the country. They were also summoned to ensure that they work with the Red Cross and the coalition reconciliation committees to help those who were returnees to come back and the internally displaced persons to be resettled. So in actual fact, the country was stable. And all that was done without any external support. The civil service also had to be set running by calling on the Secretary General to talk to all the permanent secretaries so that they prepare their strategic plans, their programs, their budget lines for the incoming government and ministers. Well, I've seen people looking at their watches. Maybe this is where I should round up. I don't know whether I have done service to this subject, but essentially, the civil service also started working. And the country was whole. The president prepared himself to come back to the Gambia. And when he returned, tens of thousands of people were in the street to welcome him back home. Now the Gambia is in the hands of a new president. The objective was to build a new Gambia. Where do we stand at this very moment? And I will come to my conclusion very soon. The issue is one of peace building, is one of democracy building and nation building. What is happening now is a cabinet has been formed of ministers. The country has a debt of $56 billion is in our own currency, both internal and external debt. The government inherited a budget that was dependent on domestic debts, and currently aid is what is supporting the budget lines of the government, more than half its budget. So there is no doubt that the challenges of development are evident. Over 400,000 children come out of our school system every 12 years. They're in search of jobs. But you need huge investment to be able to provide those jobs. From our own perspective, we consider this to be a transition. And that is why, to us, we believe that the major role of the government is to establish a new constitution, build the institutions of the state, ensure accountability in managing the funds of the state, and help all sectors of society to have the opportunity to become part of the productive base of the economy. It is believed that if the instruments and institutions are developed, then a new government will emerge tomorrow by putting its program before the people. And based on that program, the people will begin to look at the development agenda of addressing the needs and aspirations of the people. The project was to remove a self-perpetuating ruler. That is the achievement. The task now for peace building, democracy building, and nation building is to start the project of building the sovereign Gambia. That is why our strong recommendation is that no development is conceivable without citizenship education. That the whole nation must work together to educate our citizens to understand that power belongs to them. With that, there can be no impunity. That is the safest guarantee of peace. It is to ensure that political parties also accept a fundamental base that they must not reform on ethno-linguistic lines, regional lines, sectarian lines. They must have the national interest at heart. And they must promote a national agenda. Different in policies, but still the base is a national agenda, not an agenda to divide the nation. That we must promote that in a republic, there is no minority. There's no minority on the basis of religion. There's no minority on the basis of ethnicity. No minority on the basis of any identity. Identities are just mere identities. But each is a sovereign voter, a depository of the sovereignty of the nation, and therefore equal in power. That is the cornerstone of democracy. A sovereign person who will see that he or she is equal to all others, and that the only difference is the pursuit of the policy that will deliver the services that all needs. We need that education in the country. And in terms of nation building, we believe that it is important to start the project of transforming the security apparatus so that the state will be transformed from an instrument of coercion into an instrument of protection. That those who are in the security apparatus will see that they are protectors of the people. So my conclusion is that the country has a future, but the future must be realized in stages. This is a transitional one, and we are trying as much as possible to encourage the government to be a depository of the coalition's agenda of creating a new Gambian who will be able to build a new Gambia. And we hope that this story will continue, and that at the end of the day, it will be a story that will be worth remembering, not because of the atrocities, but because of the achievements. Thank you very much.
Right. We have about 10 minutes or so for questions. So we will have to keep those short. And I'll invite you to ask away.
I'd like to thank the speaker for coming and delivering this very powerful talk today to us. My question is about creating a self-sustaining democracy. I'm sorry. My question is about maintaining a self-sustaining democracy in Gambia in place of the self-sustaining dictatorship which you had before. You mentioned that education is key to that, as well as economic growth. What else do you see as being the most important steps forward to, like I said, maintain a democracy?
Well, to maintain a democracy will require three fundamental things. One, you need a sovereign people. Number two, freedom of association, political association is important because it is policies that build nations. Therefore, freedom of association creates the possibility of having political parties. Those political parties must be able to put a program before the people on how they are going to deliver the prosperity and the liberty people need. And therefore, the sovereign person must also make a decision to associate with others politically, to form political parties or be part of political parties. The third agenda is leadership. That you must know what type of civil, political, economic, social, cultural, ecological policies you have to put in place to enlarge liberty and prosperity. And that comes through knowledge. You must have people who will seek the knowledge that they will put into operation in order to address the needs of the people, which means that political parties must be the depository of that knowledge and information, of that leadership. Once you have that, then the people will be able to make informed choice. Because once the society is open, the information is getting to the people will be able to select the type of leaders who will be able to deliver the liberty and prosperity they need. That's the type of society that can be democratic. I don't know whether and that is the project that must be continued in the Gambia. At least for us, that is the project we are going to continue.
Since the end of traditional imperialism in Africa, and since the rise of China, Africa has become a battleground of economic imperialism. What steps is Gambia planning to take to reduce the impact of economic imperialism in Africa, and specifically Gambia?
Well, if you look at the whole world, you can see the contradictions. But we have reached a stage where you do not only talk about the imposition, you also look at the country which allows that imposition to take place. You look at Gambia, I've mentioned, look at the ocean, look at the land, fertile land, look at the minerals. There is even prospecting for oil. So the riches are there. And you see it in most of these countries. So there are two developmental agendas. There's what you call self-reliant sustainable development and self-sufficient sustainable development. The self-sufficient sustainable development is what the Soviet Union was trying to do. That is feeling that you can isolate yourself from the rest of the world and build an economy. And to do that, you have to produce your raw materials in total. You must have to be able to process them, and you must be able to build the machines to process them. Then you can be isolated from the rest of the world. But essentially, that is not the type of paradigm that has worked. What you need is self-sustaining, sustainable development that is self-reliant, meaning that still you can interact on the basis of equality with all other economies in the world. So it means that each individual country must have a self-reliant economy. That requires you to produce the raw materials that you need. It requires that you process the raw materials. It requires that you work with others to build the machines that you need to produce what you need, either collectively as a region, just like Europe is trying to form the European Union. Africa needs to have continental unity. And with continental unity, of course, Africa will be able to develop, and it can trade with the rest of the world on the basis of equality. So we now need a resilient Africa, which will be able to come together to build what is required to facilitate that development. When the Second World War devastated Europe, what happened? America told Europe, go and meet, develop a European recovery program. And they developed a recovery program, which required agricultural production, it required production of energy, it required processing, it requires also inter-European trade. That is what facilitated the development of Europe. In Africa, a continent is abundant with wealth. What you need is to translate that into an economic policy that will address the problems of the continent. And one economic policy that no nation can survive without is to ensure that this state is a productive state. If Hobbes can say centuries ago that you talk about a leviathan for a monarch, now we are being told that this state must recede from being productive to guarantee welfare. That it must recede. You must have less state. When monarchs were even being demanded to be able to safeguard and be a guarantor of prosperity, what more the republic, which where power is derived from the consent of the people. What do you expect of a government? And there is absolutely no doubt that if you look at what is happening in the world, many countries are building a productive state. That's how Singapore developed. That's how Norway develops. Norway has sovereign national wealth of over $1 trillion. That's how some of these Arab countries have been developing. Of course, they are monarchies, but they've been using their oil to build sovereign national wealth. And African countries must make sure that the oil, the diamond, the minerals must be translated into sovereign national wealth, because it's that sovereign national wealth that will enable you to build infrastructure, that will be able to help you to build certain cooperatives, so that those who cannot find jobs will be able to have means of income through the cooperative. Just imagine, you find certain family farms in Gambia. They lack fertilizer, seeds, and farming implements. So they produce very small. When a cooperative would give them the farming implements, and they'll be able to produce big and even pay back what they've taken from the cooperative. So you'll need projects of that nature to build the productive base, and you have public enterprises that cannot even pay dividends to government. You have to make sure that they are productive, managed very well, so that they pay dividend into government coffers, and the private enterprise will do its own, the cooperatives will do their own, the small scale enterprises will do their own, but you must have cooperative banks to enable those small producers to have the income to be able to continue producing. So you need a project that will get a whole nation producing. And with cooperation of other countries, of course, you can have an African central bank. You can have an African investment bank. Just imagine the World Bank. 11 billion to be able to start a project which is now yielding how many billions? To conclude, you have an African dictator who will invest 11 billion in a Swiss bank. So you see the potential of the continent to create an African investment bank and put all that, and what the World Bank is doing, those banks will be able to do that on the African continent. So clearly that is the way forward. The way forward is not the old thinking, align with the Soviet Union or align with America or align with China. That is a myopic mentality. How China developed is very simple. What China was doing, you have Chinese state companies, even in Gambia 30 years ago, where they will construct, they will be paid foreign exchange, they will put it in British banks, earn more profit, and then invest it in American bonds. Just go and click and say how much China is investing in American bonds, which is trillions of dollars. And through that, it has foreign exchange to invest back into its own economy. So these are not strange things. These are things that we can study and understand. So to build the economies of countries can be studied, it can be done, and we will do it. There is no doubt about that.
We are unfortunately out of time, but if you join me in thanking...
I'm sorry for taking too much time.
Not a problem at all. It's really great.
Sure.
Oh, yes.
You should have stopped me when I was...
Very much. This is fun.